Hello, animation fans, and welcome to another iAnimate podcast. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and you're listening to episode 103. In this episode, we have iAnimate feature alumni Meg Grube joining us. Meg has worked at such studios as DreamWorks, Luma, and ILM, where she's worked on such films as Ant-Man and the Wasp, A Wrinkle in Time, Black Panther, and Thor Ragnarok, just to name a few. It was really great to get Meg in on this podcast since she has been through our program. She's also worked at a high level, but she hasn't been in the industry for 15, 20, 25 years yet. So this was kind of a nice opportunity to recap with one of our alumni who's working in the industry and to hear how they've made the transition and some of the things they learned that are probably a little bit more fresh from maybe some of our artists and students listening to this podcast. So check it out. All right. Well, Meg, I know I've said this every single time, but I mean it with all sincerity. I always thank my guests for their time. You guys got busy schedules. You guys got work and families and things of that nature. So it's always a treat to get you in on a podcast and take time to talk with us. So I really appreciate your time on this podcast.
Yeah, well, right back at you. Thank you, Larry. I was like so really flattered that you asked, and yeah, just happy to be here. Glad it worked
Awesome.
out.
Well, kind of as we were talking a little bit, and you mentioned you were a little bit nervous accepting the podcast, but kind of one of the reasons why I was looking at this podcast is a couple different angles. Was one, as I kind of mentioned, you've got dozens of films underneath your belt already, so I know you have that experience, but you're not also a veteran who's been in the industry for 20 years, and so I think you can bring a unique perspective on kind of your time in the industry and how that's kind of worked out here. We've had some great guests, but some of them have been doing this for a long time and they may have forgot, what it's like to get into the industry and kind of work this way. And maybe it's different from this time from when they were in the industry. So I just think you bring a unique perspective. You've got the experience, but you're still relatively new in here, so to speak. And then you kind of mentioned you've got some twists and turns kind of coming in. So I think this is gonna be a great interview and just some information for our audience. So right off the bat, how did you get into the industry? How did did you want to get into animation? Did you like the entertainment industry? Was there a different route that you kind of thought maybe at first, yeah, I'd like to check that out, but kind of brought you into here? So how did you get here?
Not linearly,
Okay.
I'll say that. So I always loved animation. Because I kind of grew up during that Disney Renaissance,
Mm,
like Little Mermaid, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, like, oh, then that was really big, and just loved that kind of stuff. Loved it forever. I remember finding out it was even a job you could do from this Bill Pete autobiography that was
mm,
in my library, and reading it, I was in, I had to be elementary school, and
okay.
found this found this book, and it blew my mind that was like people made it. I
Right,
do
right.
remember that moment, and so it was always kind of, I would say, in the back of my mind, but I kind of grew up in a sort of rural area of Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
I didn't know anybody who did anything remotely like animation. So I don't know, it just didn't seem like something that people like myself did, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And this was like DVDs were kind of were like becoming a thing. So behind the scenes were becoming a thing. So I would watch a lot of behind the scenes, like, especially in high school, and see how things got done. So like I'd have moments where it seemed like, yes, this is what I'm gonna do. And then moments where I'm like, I don't know anybody who does, I can't do this. So when it came time to go to college, I think, when I was a senior in high school, I was also like, I was a good student. So I was getting, I think, praise and recognition academically. I was also very into drawing. Growing up, I did a lot of drawing. So it's also, like, you get that kind of art kid
Hmm.
recognition
Yeah.
too. So I think when it came time to go to college, that was the input I was getting. You know, I was good at academics, particularly English and writing, and I was good at drawing. So I think when you kind of get that constant feedback, like, oh, this is the thing you're good at, that's when I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to school and do this. So I went to Syracuse University, and
New
I
York,
started
right?
out, hmm?
New York.
Yeah, upstate
Yep.
New York,
Yeah.
very, very cold and snowy. And I started out as an illustration major. I think and an English dual major, which like looking back, it's funny to think that that was my like safe choice.
Uh-huh.
Like that was going to make it easy for me. Um, but I found really, I think in my head too, with illustration, I thought I kind of had more options and almost thought like I might even go into storyboarding because I'm like, well, if I have this illustration major, you know, work on my draftsmanship, maybe storyboarding over there. And like I'm doing writing too in English. Maybe I can write stuff because I was just really into film as well. So I think I just thought I had more options. But I think very quickly I found that for drawing, when it was just something I did for fun, I really enjoyed it. But as soon as it became about like, it's a job, I have to get good at this for a career, it really like zapped it
Yeah.
for me. It became very stressful
Mm,
suddenly. And um I just like my heart wasn't in it. And then at the same time, um with English, I was, you know, writing papers for school and I don't I don't remember what book I was writing a paper for, but I had this moment where I was writing a paper and I realized like, oh, I'm just really good at knowing how to get an A. I'm not really analyzing the book or
uh-huh.
feeling anything towards this book I was
Right,
reading.
right.
I'm just, I just know if I write certain things, like I'll get an A.
You're a good student. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which, yeah, that was pretty, I was like, oh, that's what I learned in school. And I had this, like, I remember having this moment, like, I'm a fraud, you know, I, I'm like, everything I know is a lie. Like, illustrations out, English out, like, what am I gonna do? And, I ended up switching to, they called it digital art at Syracuse. It wasn't like specifically a 3D animation program. It was kind of just more general. So I switched to digital art and that, it was funny, like they didn't even teach Maya. They used LightWave. I don't know if
Oh,
you,
yeah, yeah. I'm familiar with
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So, like that was literally the first 3D program I ever opened. But I distinctly remember opening LightWave and the first time, like in the viewport, seeing the timeline, it made sense in my brain
Mm,
and it just clicked and it just felt very comfortable in a way that
gotcha.
illustration had none of this stuff had. So I'm like,
Okay.
okay, like I don't know what I'm gonna do in through, but I'm like, I'm gonna focus on this because this
Gotcha.
feels almost natural in a way. So then yeah, did 4 years at Syracuse and it, like I said, it was like more of a general
Yeah.
degree. So I did some animations that were terrible. I had a reel, but it was not impressive,
Okay.
especially because around this time too, um, blogs were really big. And it was when you were starting to see people blogging about like, I got this internship at Pixar. I got, you know, I'm doing the Disney internship. And I remember thinking, one, that it was just possible because I was kind of seeing people like myself, like, you know, women, everything, doing these internships
Hmm.
from various backgrounds, just going to school, doing their thing. So I'm like, okay, you know, this is achievable, but then at the same time saying like, oh, this is their demo reel and this is mine, you know, like it's, I don't think I'm gonna get an animation job out of school, which I did not, but at all,
Yeah.
nothing. Um, so graduated, moved to LA with some friends, kind of shortly after graduating, didn't have a job, and just kind of hustled and ended up my first job was being a PA at like an ad agency
Okay.
called Ant Farm. who I got a friend had recommended me, which was really kind. And I mean, I had nothing kind of to my name. They were literally looking at my GPA because I had like no experience, hadn't done anything remotely PA related. But they actually hired me, which is like, it's shocking, but they did. And so I did, I was a PA for advertising, and it was really intense.
How so?
Uh, it was a lot of hours. It was just really busy. Like the turnaround, it
Mm.
was advertising for video games. Like
Oh, okay.
we were doing the ad campaigns for, at the time, Call of Duty, like Assassin's Creed, Guitar Hero, a bunch of,
Gotcha.
you know, those kind of games.
Uh-huh.
And you just really long hours. Just the turnaround is insane. The you know, client requests are always changing. So I was just working a lot. Like it's to this day like the longest hours I think I've ever
Yeah.
done was in this first job
That's good
ever.
to know. Being in the animation industry, that's yeah,
Yeah, so
that's
it's
saying
really
something.
saying something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I kind of I like the people I work with, but then I kind of figured I don't know if advertising is for me, because I wanted to be making the thing. I didn't want to be making the ad for the thing. There's a lot of like brilliant creative work in advertising, but I almost found myself I'm like, I wish I was just making the game instead of
Mm,
like the ad for the game. And I was still thinking about animation a lot, but I was working so much that I honestly like really hadn't done any work on my reel
right,
because I was
right.
so busy. And then luckily, when I was looking for another job, another friend knew somebody who knew someone who was a production manager at DreamWorks, talked to them, was able to get an interview, and then ended up being a PA at DreamWorks. So again, like still no animation
Gotcha. Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
And
So
so
as a
yeah,
PA, what did you do?
so
For
I
those that maybe not be
started.
interested in, or may be interested or not familiar with that role.
I started at my first, at the time DreamWorks, like they assigned PAs to different shows, and you were in different departments. So my first PA role there was, I was on Turbo, and I was a PA for the rigging and crowds department. So I was taking a lot of notes. You're also kind of just communicating to all the different departments if we need, you know, like, oh, the crowds artists need this thing from modeling, or this, you know, update, yeah, character modeling update, you know, whatever it is, you know, you're kind of communicating with the other PAs, you're setting up, you know, it's scheduling a lot of meetings, it's a lot of like coordinating
Gotcha.
with the different departments.
Okay.
And which honestly was great, because then I got to see everything.
Right, right.
I got to see the whole pipeline. I met artists pretty much in every department, got to see what everybody did. I saw how people communicated to each other. Very importantly, I saw what different departments needed from each other, and what you could kind of anticipate as needs or problems,
Mhm.
you know, down the line.
Right,
Um, saw how they managed their time, you know, all these things that ended up being really useful later. I just was kind of observing
right.
there as a PA. And the other good thing was that my hours were a lot better.
Okay.
So I had evenings free. And I think kind of seeing animators work and everything, I'm like, I gotta do this. I have to
Gotcha.
do this. So that's when I enrolled in iAnimate.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because I actually talked to Jason Ryan was there at the time.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I stopped him in the hall once and just asked him about the program, and he was incredibly kind and generous, told me about it, told me what to expect, like encouraged me to try it
Awesome.
out. So that's why I started iAnimate, and I didn't know how to use Maya because I learned LightWave.
Okay.
So I took, while I was waiting for the class to start, I just did tutorials on, do you remember
Oh yeah,
lynda.com?
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I think they ended up getting
I,
purchased by LinkedIn, right? I think they can,
yeah, I
yeah,
think so. That sounds
yeah.
right. so I just like was doing tutorials on lynda.com, just like teaching myself Maya. And
Maya.
then I started iAnimate, and it was, I just did that in the evenings and on the weekends. I loved it. I I was just working off of like my laptop and a little wireless mouse, just kind of hunched over my desk like a shrimp. It's so funny that I did that the whole time. I still don't know how I do it because now, your computer setup, so it's like mission control,
Yeah,
multiple
that's right.
monitor.
Multiple monitors.
I
Yeah.
had this little 15-inch screen that I was doing. Yeah, I don't know how I did it.
You know what's awesome about that though? And I don't know when this will air comparison, but next week, so I think it's May 6th, 8th, and 10th, we've got Ted T, who's going
Saw
to be
that.
joining us for some master classes. He and Devil Negative reached out to us and just wanted to, with his tie with iAnimate. And I can't tell you how many of the people, alumni, who reached back out to me were so stoked about it and just talking about how they love Ted. And I have the same things.
Me
It's one of those
too.
things that when you go back to your time at iAnimate, Mike Wallings was one of my first instructors, my very first instructor. And it's just neat when I get people enrolled and I'm like, hey, who's your instructor? Like Mike Walling. I'm like, oh man, just great memories. So it's kind of funny when you talk about, being hunched over like a little shrimp, working on a 15-inch monitor. Not ideal, but fun memories.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And yeah, I saw that email about that. I'm so excited. He was my workshop 7
Uh-huh.
instructor, and just like changed the way I thought about everything, gave me the confidence to go out there. He's the best. I'm so looking forward to that
He's awesome.
master class.
Yes. Which is
Um,
open for all alumni and currently enrolled students. So, like I said, this will probably get released later, but we'll look forward to doing more of this kind of stuff where we can kind of bring
Perfect.
back. So, yeah, it's just a neat opportunity.
It's a great idea. Yeah. And so yeah, so speaking of Ted, I did all the workshops, and then yeah, ended with his workshop 7, which was phenomenal. Made friends in that program. I think like I think about 2 weeks, we're having almost like a little just Zoom reunion
Awesome.
with
Oh, that's
that class.
fantastic.
Yeah. Um, so it's
That's
that
killer.
Animate really was just so, this isn't lip service, like it was so important to me and just set me up for everything.
Awesome.
And
That's really neat to hear. I love that.
yeah, yeah, I absolutely owe my career to that, because after shortly, not too long after wrapping workshop 7, I actually had a demo reel that was sort of competitive, and so I was sending that out everywhere, and was actually getting responses, because
Awesome.
I think it's important to note to anybody out there, I would be sending stuff out for so long and just hearing nothing back, just sending stuff out into a black hole.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to mention I was getting rejected a lot up until this point. So it's not like I just waltzed into like the multiple PA jobs. Like there
Mhm.
was a lot of rejection in this time period, but um, this was kind of the first time I was hearing responses. And so it did lead to my first animation job ever, which was doing visual effects animation at a place called Luma Pictures.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
hmm
So
in
how
Santa
did
Monica.
let me ask you this then real quick. How comfortable were you with the interview process then? Maybe, you'd mentioned that you'd had some other jobs prior to that, but now kind of stepping into animation. Did iAnimate help you in regards to feel like, hey, I can jump into a studio here? Or was that stuff that you kind of already felt a little more comfortable with, i.e. with DreamWorks having a PA? How did that kind of set you up, I guess?
I think it was a combination of both. I think DreamWorks one got me just, I think, fairly comfortable with just talking to people within the industry
Okay.
and kind of just knowing like the basics of the lingo almost, and kind of to be familiar with um, animation production and like working on a sequence, etc. And then I think iAnimate one, I mean, I could just talk about my process because I do remember them asking about my process, and
So
now like after
they ask you how your process to get in or process as far as animating.
animating,
Okay.
because again, like, because I hadn't worked as an animator before, so they were like kind of they were asking me a lot of questions, because I
Mm,
think, I was a bit of a gamble, because I, was coming from production. Um, and so I was able to talk about my process, because I developed a bit of one
mhm.
after 7 iAnimate courses, and they're they were very interested. It was a lot of stuff from workshop 3. I remember them being interested in, because it's VFX, so it was like a
You're
lot
right.
of body mechanics. Um, so they were asking a lot of questions about that, like if I filmed reference, all those things. So I think they wanted to make sure that I kind of could at least work my way through a problem, since it was going to be my first job.
Right.
So yeah, and then I think just my just general enthusiasm as someone wanting to get into the industry, I think translated a bit, which I think came from my anime, because it like at least gave me enough confidence.
Right.
I think I would have maybe been a bit shy about that
Mm.
if I hadn't.
Less confident.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. So
So
therefore
yeah,
more
so I think
shy.
a
Yeah.
combination
Very
of the
cool.
two. Yeah.
Now, how much is your because you were in that industry for a bit, VFX? Are you still doing VFX, or because I know you're at ILM, right?
Yes.
But it looks like you've worked on some other ones that were more feature type as well, right?
Yeah, so I've kind of, it's at this point I've done a little bit of everything.
Okay.
The majority of my work has definitely been in, like visual effects,
Uh-huh.
animation for visual effects, but I've still touched like little bits of, I would say, all the different elements, but yeah, mostly VFX.
And kind of going back to something you touched upon, just even the body mechanics. That was one of the biggest things I felt like. I know it's one of the, like you said, one of the three, the first three, but I go, it's not um, basic, it's fundamental. And I go, it
Right.
carries on into your acting. I go, if you got the greatest reference and things of that nature, but you can't move the body in a convincing way, it's gone. It doesn't matter. And I felt like that was one of the things that I've seen people even in iAnimate come in at a later workshop and then jump back down and take a workshop 3 just to hone those body mechanics and just how instrumental they are for everything you're doing, VFX or feature where you're having to convey convincing acting.
100%. I think it's the thing throughout my career I've used the most. It's especially just doing mainly visual effects.
Mhm.
It's not uncommon to get a shot that doesn't really involve a ton of acting, but there's very few that don't have some kind of body mechanics. And even if it's not a character, still even just like the physics, the gravity of a thing.
Right.
Even some of that workshop 1 stuff, like I just had a shot. I don't know if I don't think I can say what it was yet, because it hasn't come out, but it was, it's an object, and it was a lot of physics, and so it was a lot of bouncing ball,
Mm. Yeah.
just in this, to get it to look right. It's true, it was like workshop 1 all over again,
Right. Right.
just in a different context,
Yeah.
and
And
it always comes back.
that's kind of why I brought that up, is because I go, it's so fundamental. And I hope that those that are listening and things that are jumping into those workshops never take that for granted. That is your foundation. I remember a podcast I did with the guys, I forget who it was on Turbo. I know Chris Kirschbaum. I forgot the other two right off. Oh, Luke Randall and she was over at Disney. Phenomenal animator. I can't think of his name right now. But that's kind of what they said, that this nail was like 3 bouncing balls on top of each other. So it was
Yeah,
like going back to workshop 1. So yeah, I just hope that those that are listening always kind of remember that those are your foundations for a reason. They aren't basic, they're foundational.
yeah. I don't think I've ever had a job that didn't involve elements of workshop 1 in particular. And then obviously a lot of the other, body mechanics, etc. But I think that one is so critical.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I truly, if you're only going to take one, I almost feel like you should just take that. Not that you shouldn't only take one,
Right.
but it's so foundational. I just don't think you'd be able to work without. At least I couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So at Luma, you were there for quite some time.
Yeah, about I guess along by VFX standards, like 3.5 years. It
So
it started out again just for people in the starting out. My first contract was a 6-week contract,
Gotcha.
and I was there 3.5 years. So I
Gotcha.
think, yeah, I think I was a little freaked out by that in the beginning, but willing to take the gamble because I thought, if this doesn't work out, I can go back
You got
to being
experience.
a PA somewhere, that's fine, and I'll have a little bit of animation experience, but you never know. Like, just if you make a good impression somewhere, even if they say it's only 6 weeks, often I found like if you make a good impression, you're going to get extended.
Gotcha. Now,
Yeah.
kind of going back to that a little bit, what were some of the things that you felt like, and again, I know contracts are what they are. It doesn't mean because you are done after that 6 weeks that they didn't like you, but they obviously liked you and were able to keep you. What were some of the things that you would give as advice that made an impression that, that go a long way?
I think the things that I remember them saying over my time there, and things I've even heard repeated at other jobs, is just one, I think number one, just being easy to work with.
Mm,
Just kind of being just generally kind of kind, going with the flow a bit. I think just kind of just taking a note and doing the note, not really back talking the note.
mm,
Or, if you get a note, if your reaction is, it's like, well, no, you shouldn't, I meant this, and I think this is, but just, you're working on someone else's movie. It's not your shot.
right.
So just, I would get a note and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what they want. So I'll do that now, and just, kind of being easygoing in that way. And, just being calm
Okay.
under pressure.
Gotcha.
I think not every job is like this, but visual effects sometimes can get, I don't know if stressful is the right word. I mean, it just gets busy. Sometimes deadlines get really tight. And there can be a lot of changes because it's a client-based system. So in feature, often you're kind of your own client if you're in a
Right.
big feature studio, but visual effects, you're usually,
Hired out to do it
um,
for someone else. Yeah.
exactly. So, you're getting feedback from the client. Sometimes it's not always timely feedback. It'll be days before you hear back, but your deadline's still the same, and you kind of, get this note. So just kind of, I think, not panicking in the face of a crazy note,
Yeah.
and just kind of taking a breath, taking a beat, and be like, okay, I have this amount of time. This is what they want. What's the best way to go about this? And I think just kind of being willing to learn just in general, because I mean, I was really green, and
Mm,
my technical knowledge, I think it was it wasn't up to standard at that point, but I was more than happy to just learn a new thing, have someone
gotcha.
show me something. So yeah, I think those are kind of the main things, but the number one thing I hear, and I've heard there and heard since, is just being kind of nice and easy to work with.
Gotcha. That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, you don't want to uh, bottleneck in a production like that. So,
Yeah. You're with these people a lot of time,
yeah.
I think you just kind of want someone you want to be around.
Now, where's Luma at?
When I was there, they were in Santa Monica.
Okay.
I think they've moved offices, but probably like still in the same general
So at this time you were in
area.
Santa
Yeah.
Monica area.
Hmm.
Gotcha. How did your obviously you mentioned that you were kind of green. You had some established practices from working at iAnimate, but green kind of in the industry there. How did your skill set and workflow develop during that time? Because I know for me, when I started working more, animating more, that's when things started clicking stuff. Was that, I'm assuming?
Definitely.
Okay. So what were some kind of
Um,
big things that you kind of recognize as you're working, or how long did it take you to kind of start recognizing that, hey, this is a better production and flow, and I'm in the rhythm now, or things of that nature?
I think while I was working there, visual effects, like I said, sometimes the turnarounds can be really tight. At the studio, they were often very tight. So you had to work quickly.
Hmm.
And the other thing was, what was often the case is the client isn't necessarily used to looking at animation the way an animator is. So, if another animator is looking at something, you understand like a blocking pass, especially if it's in stepped, or just kind of, even if it's just like the key poses, an animator can look at a blocking pass and see kind of where it's
Going.
going.
Yeah.
But sometimes, clients typically aren't animators for the most part. So sometimes they don't really know what they're looking at when they see what we would typically think of as blocking. So you'd almost kind of need something further along for a client to look at it and not freak out.
Hmm.
So I sort of almost learned like that, the kind of splocking
Okay.
method,
Uh-huh.
where you kind of almost block out and in spline, because it's you just had to go so fast. I think that was the main thing. I think just going as fast as possible, especially in those kind of early stages where you're just trying to survive.
Hmm.
So it was a bit of a kind of blocking method, and I think also just learning at the time to adapt to the shot, because working visual effects too, it's so much about the edit and the cut, and
Okay.
sometimes you get assigned a shot and you know how it has to end because of
The next
the
shot after.
shot
Yeah.
after it. So then that's kind of change how I do things. Or you are dealing with a plate, and like a live action plate,
Hmm.
and it has to, like match at a certain, it's gonna blend into the plate element at a certain frame. So now you've got to think of how I'm gonna, do that. Or if, you get a live action plate and they want an element to be covering something, like it's every
Your
shot is
shot
so
isn't isolated in that regards, right?
exactly.
Yep.
So I think just learning to adapt to the needs of the shot,
Hmm.
I think was a big thing that I
Gotcha.
learned, especially like in that kind of specific part of the industry.
Yeah. One of the things that you kind of mentioned too, just the speed that you were kind of working at, I felt like that was beneficial for my growth because when you're in school, iAnimate, you can put as much time as you have to work on a shot. Whereas when you're in production, that's a different story.
Yeah,
But it helped, I think, have to be very specific, have to plan very well. Um, and that started helping develop my eye as well. Does that be the same for you?
agreed. It helped develop my eye. I think even just looking at stuff in the cut and realizing it's so much is about like eye direction too, like, where you're looking from the shot before. And I think you have to sell the shot too. Like you
Yeah.
have just such a limited amount of time to get across, what you need to in a show, because obviously every once in a while you get assigned like some big long shot, but for the most part, you're kind of getting shorter shots. So it's like, how am I getting in the most like clear way, getting this across? And I think too, working so fast, you're not, you don't have time to second guess yourself a lot.
Mm,
So I think it gave me more kind of confidence in my ideas,
mm.
because it's almost like I didn't have time
Yeah.
to doubt it too
This is my
much.
route. I've got to make this
I'm
work right.
committing,
Yeah, there
and
you go.
yeah, kind of, yeah. Like planning your shot is important and great, but I think sometimes as a student, if I had a lot of time to just noodle on something,
Yeah,
I'd go so far and be like, well, maybe I should change this. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. Should I have
right.
done that? It's like you've got a deadline, you don't even
Yeah.
have time. So I think it really teaches you to commit to an
I love that
idea.
word right there. I love that word, commit on that. Yeah. I can't tell you my file, not file sizes, but file iterations at iAnimate. So many, so many. It was like I was afraid to, okay, now I made, a couple changes here and let me, save up, right? Well, now my file says, they're like 3 or 4, at tops, because you just get more comfortable, you get more committed. You're just, yeah, I like that. You're not trying to reiterate, well, let me see where this kind of takes me. I don't have that luxury, and so it does help you plan better. But I love that word committed, because you just like, this is where I'm going with it.
Yeah. And you start to learn what doesn't work,
Yeah.
the more. So then you're not always scrambling for what am I going to do in this shot? You kind of
Hmm.
start to get a sense of like this for this kind of shot, this probably isn't going to work. This isn't going to read in the amount of time I have,
Right.
like that kind of thing. You start to, it's not just about like, it's not that your first idea is the one you should always do, but it's more just like your brain gets better at sort of discarding
Yep.
stuff that's not going to work in the shot.
Yeah, for sure. Any fun projects or favorite projects that you had? I love your, what does it say? Need what on your cup?
Oh, um, it says Mama needs some coffee. It's water, but I
Okay.
just like it because it's so massive. So
Sorry, I
I could
like
just,
coffee. So when I saw the coffee on there, I was trying to figure out what it said. So
I also love coffee,
yes.
but it's like what is it? It's almost like 4 o'clock my time.
What's wrong
This
with
would be a
that?
lot
You
of
can still
coffee
get
at four
coffee.
o'clock. True. True. That's a good point.
Make that sound like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Any favorite projects that you worked on at Luma before we kind of transition? Was there any ones that, and I say favorite meaning like that could be just the most fun, or maybe it wasn't the most fun, but I learned something significantly here. Was there any, I guess, so maybe let me rephrase that. Were there any standout shows that you worked on while you're at Luma?
Good question. I remember because so what was interesting about Luma was it was a lot of Marvel
Mm,
shows. They had a good relationship with Marvel, and that was very much kind of the heyday of Marvel
right.
movies. So it was a lot of those projects. So I think there was a general excitement for especially some of the iconic characters.
Right.
Like Spider-Man Homecoming. That was a tough show, but it was, pretty neat to work on a Spider-Man movie.
Absolutely.
Um,
What made it
I
challenging?
mean, I think the Spider-Man is such an important property to a lot of people, and
Hmm.
there's going to be so many eyes on it. So they just, they wanted it to look good. They wanted it to look a certain way. They also, they wanted to like distinguish that Peter, because this was the Tom Holland
Hmm.
Peter Parker. This was the introduction of him as far as like a full feature. I think he first appeared in one of the like Civil War maybe, but for his
Right.
like we're establishing this iteration of Peter Parker, so they like were very even particular about the way he holds, his hand. Like they didn't want certain, like I remember they didn't want like a very almost claw like gripping the wall. Like they wanted like softer hand. Like there was a lot of just particular things, and they uh some of it wasn't even animation wise, like some of it like just getting the suit to look a certain way. But I think just in general, it was the wanting to distinguish this new iteration
Mm,
of Peter Parker. So they were just very
particular on that.
particular. Um, but at the same time, it's always cool to work on, to say
So,
you got to like just have any kind of influence on Spider-Man. Um, I I remember I do remember being excited because up until that point, there weren't a lot of female characters in Marvel. So the
uh-huh.
first one I ever really got to animate was Wasp
Oh, very
ever.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I just been doing entirely male characters. I think one time I had a digi double of Black Widow getting strangled, but
Okay.
it wasn't anything, I was like kind of matching up hands, but so I remember I was excited to work on Wasp because that was the first female character I ever got to do. And
Did
then it
your,
was
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say too, sometimes it wasn't the big projects that were the most fun. Like I had a lot of fun on Underworld 5 because the client kind of just let you do what you wanted. So you just got to
Nice.
like do whatever you wanted with werewolves, and they
Uh-huh.
weren't as kind of, it wasn't a Marvel property where there's a lot of eyes on it and
Right,
there's a
right.
lot of money on the line. So everybody's very particular. This client was very animator friendly and it was very much like the rule of cool.
Okay.
So it's just like have fun with werewolves. So that was really enjoyable.
Awesome. Now,
Yeah.
did you have to adapt working on creatures?
Yeah, my first the first thing I ever animated at Luma as an animator was ants, which I found tricky.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
because it was, and I think that was me kind of forcing myself to even just learn gait patterns and, uh, because I hadn't done too many creatures over my time at iAnimate. I'd done some, like I, done like the quadruped run,
Yeah.
walk. That chase rig had come out. Like I'd
Hmm.
done some stuff with him, but like I'd never done anything with six legs. I'd never, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, that and I think VFX was my introduction to creatures that fly and flight dynamics. Um, so for me, that ended up just being a lot of research
Gotcha.
and a lot of just looking at videos. I have to frame through. I'm not very good at just watching something play and
And making it
digesting it.
right, right.
I have to frame through
I think I'm in the
for,
same
yeah,
boat. Yeah.
yeah. So
Gotcha.
that was, I think it was a lot of YouTube, a lot of reference for me, for sure.
Gotcha. The question I was going to ask you on the Wasp, how did your approach change working on a female character? Did your reference change? Did you on some of the other ones? Did you get men to shoot reference for you, or you just did it yourself? But now felt like I got this a little bit easier now for Wasp, or how did that change at all? Just out of curiosity.
I don't think too much changed. I think it was just more my excitement to do it, and it was one of the first times I specifically asked, I'm like, I want to do this character. So I think
Okay.
that it was more almost like that time where I was excited to work on a character instead of, I would say I was like generally excited to work on anything, but I was kind of like, yeah, whatever you want to give me is
Yeah, just
fine.
handing shots and stuff and work. Yeah.
Um, but this for them, like, I want to do this person. So I
Gotcha.
think, because otherwise, I think my approach to uh doing the reference was the same. I mean, probably easier just because I think there was almost less acting on my behalf because a
Mm,
lot of my more natural instincts,
yeah.
instead of having to think like, oh no, this is how Ant-Man would do it. I think
Right.
it was maybe a little bit easier in that way. I do remember I wasn't able to go into the mocap studio to film stuff. That was right around the time I think I had a stress fracture in my foot.
Oh wow.
So my gait was all off balance, because I had like the boot on.
Too much mixed
So
martial arts or what?
no, I think it's just from running and hiking. Just
Okay.
one day it started hurting and then got an x-ray and then that was that. But because I wanted to do it, but it just looked too weird because it just very obviously looked like I was in a boot. So,
Sorry, this
it
is not
didn't
a
work.
pirate shot. Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, anything that you or what are the things that you enjoy most working in VFX, and what are some of the things that are most challenging? I mean, I think you might have hit on some of that, but just for clarity.
Yeah, between, Luma and ILM, I think I've heard this said before in previous podcasts, but it's true. It's just the variety. You just get to work on so many different things. Um, you never know what's going to be next, and it's you're not often, I think, like bored in that way, or you
Okay.
don't kind of hit that wall of I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. It's so varied, and I think too, um, at least especially at ILM, there's a lot of control over the camera too if it's a full CG
Mm,
shot. So I enjoy moments too where I almost get to be like cinematographer for a
hmm.
day kind of deal. But I, went even just last year went from doing kind of cute Christmas ornament characters to like a xenomorph,
Okay.
in the span of a few weeks. So it's like that level of variety
Gotcha.
is cool. Yeah.
Do you have any time of adjustment? I remember okay, little tired, so I'm trying. The names are always tough for me.
I'm the same
Matthew,
way.
forget what his name was. He worked on. He was at ILM, then he came over to Sony and worked on Cloud with a Chance of Meatballs. I remember him saying, working on. I think it was the big hamburger spider or whatever, and he ended up kind of animating it very VFX-ish. And they're like, okay, this looks great, but this is, we need more cartoonies like that. Do you feel like you adapt pretty quick because of the variety, or you're talking about kind of changing that pretty quick? How quickly do you adapt to the new show?
I think quickly, but I think that's just come from experience from having
Okay,
done it so much, because I think working VFX, it forces you to because Luma in particular, they a lot of times, because they're smaller, they're a smaller VFX
gotcha.
studio, so less artists on staff, maybe like a little less flexible than like a bigger studio that
Hmm.
kind of has more kind of depth in their team. So you would be working on sometimes multiple projects at the same
Okay,
time, which I actually kind of liked, because
yeah,
if I was sort of struggling on one shot on one show, I could kind of take a mental break, go on this completely other thing, and that was almost like a reset for my brain. Um, but I think that just teaches you to be very, just kind of flexible
okay,
at all times. And even a lot of times within the show itself, you're doing really different things. Like on Black Panther, for example, sometimes you'd have shots with Black Panther, who moves in a certain way. But I also had a lot of shots of like Andy Serkis's like robo arm, mechanical, I don't know what it's called, but he had this like arm that transformed into a gun.
uh-huh,
So that was within the same show, within the same
gotcha,
sequence even. So
gotcha,
you're sometimes doing very different types of things, even within the same project. So it just kind of over time, you kind of get used to being on your toes
gotcha.
a bit. Yeah.
Matthew DeMuro was his name. So
Okay.
you want to check out that podcast? Anybody listening? That's it. That's what it came. You hit upon something I really liked. You said that reset. Uh, I mentioned before, I have a wrestling background, and probably to a fault, I think I can be stubborn, tenacious, and wanting to finish something. So sometimes I get on
Mm,
I was on a shot and it was bugging me because I'm like, it's just not working. I'm like, so I think that tenacity is good to a degree, but I also felt like if I would just stop, jump to a new shot, and then come back, I would see it with fresh eyes. So I love that you mentioned and brought up that reset, getting stuck. So it's just good to hear, other artists that are going, yeah, I get stuck. I need a mental reset. Um, how quickly in their process did you learn that?
very quickly. It's one of my number one, I think, almost kind of in my bag of tricks as an animator, is to step away from something for a little bit if I'm
Mhm.
hitting a wall. I mean, as much as, that feeling when you're really in the groove and you're just the best animator in the world and everything you do is amazing. Like that's great, but that's not all the time. Um, it's I'll still kind of, like hit a wall with something, I can't quite get it. And if I start to see myself just over and over again, try something and it's just not working, and that's usually my cue to step away. And I think I learned that early again at Luma because of the multiple projects thing. I I think it started because it was almost like a nervous habit, because I knew I had stuff due, and if I felt like I was wasting time on something, I'd
Mm,
get a little bit nervous. And I'm like, well, I'll just knock out these other kind of low hanging fruit, like maybe easier
right.
shots, um, instead of this big, long, tricky one. Because I'd be afraid, what if I spent all day on this tricky one and then hadn't done these three other shots?
Right.
So maybe I'll switch and do these easy ones and then come back to this. But then I would find like, oh, that actually worked, at least for me, really well.
Mm,
So I've continued to do that. At ILM, you're not they're bigger. You don't get sometimes you do, but less often. You're not on like a bunch of different projects at the same time, but you'll still often have like more than one shot assigned to you.
Gotcha.
So if I'm really hitting a wall, I'll either try working on one of my other shots, or I really will uh step away. I go 15-minute break a
Okay.
lot of times, or just
Coffee,
go for a
right?
walk, fill up my massive mug of coffee. And man, like just a night's sleep and coming in the next
Fresh.
morning. Sometimes there'd be something where like the last couple hours of the day, I'm like, I can't get this. And then you come in the next day and like within a half hour, you're like, oh, okay. I
There it
was
is.
just, yeah, I just needed that kind of reset.
Right.
And yeah, it's my
Great to
favorite,
hear.
one of my favorite tools, I think, in my
Yeah.
toolbox.
Great to hear. So then I asked you, kind of what are one of your favorite aspects of VFX? What are some of the more challenging?
Many. I love working in visual effects, but it's I think not for the faint of heart. I think just schedules can get really intense because because it's client based. You're kind of at the whim of the bids and their schedule and their needs. And they can change their minds about things, cuts can change. There's you can final shot and it's great, but the cut changed, so now they need something different, so it's always changing. And sometimes, yeah, it just gets, there's just a lot to do in a short amount of time. um I think I mean, everybody's experiencing it now. There's volatility
Hmm.
in the industry, of course, so that can be, sometimes you get to that point of you're working and you don't totally know where your next job is going to be.
Mhm.
So it's like, how do I
Manage
focus
that.
on this when I'm trying to like manage the anxiety of like, oh gosh, what am I going to do next? But uh and sometimes I think sometimes people could run into, especially if you really love like acting and character stuff, that's not always what you're working on in visual effects,
Right.
because I think with visual effects, they need so many different things. So you might want to be doing, a character, but you're doing this kind of like mechanical car thing instead. And some people love that, but then for other people, it's kind of not their deal. So I versus I think, other types of work or other studios where it's you kind of know you're going to be doing a lot of characters, or you have a bit more of a sense of what you'll be working on. With visual effects, you don't always know, which is sometimes really awesome because of the variety.
Hmm.
Or, if it's not your cup of tea, then you're like, oh no, I'm on this for the next 6 months kind of deal.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Now I did notice that in ILM you got to work on, I think it was called, I don't know how to actually pronounce it, Kugli.
Oh, are you
I'm
talking about
mispronouncing.
Kugali, the
Yes.
Wonju
Oh,
thing? Yeah, so that
did
was
I hack that
Cinesite.
bad? I hacked it
No,
really
oh, it's fine. It's fine.
bad.
If I was on it, so if I didn't know, that would be embarrassing. Um, yeah, that was
So that was
uh
at Cinesite.
yes, yeah, with Jason Ryan.
Yes. So now, did
Yeah.
you go to Canada?
No, I was able to work remotely because I worked through a studio called Agora. So it was almost
Yes.
like a subcontractor.
Well, our buddies, David
Dave.
Hubert. So
Yep.
Dave has been one of our founders for the games and creatures and stuff. So, and that studio he's been doing great with. So it's neat to see him really thriving in that. So you did contract work through them for this.
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It was great. Yeah. So I did that maybe 2 years ago, and yes, I subcontracted for them for a few months. Another example of a contract that started shorter and got extended. And that was really exciting because it was a more kind of feature type
Right.
work, which I hadn't done too much of, and it had
Hmm.
always been a kind of goal of mine. So that was really fun.
Nice.
And my first time getting to work with Jason as an animator.
Uh-huh.
I think at DreamWorks I was a PA, but this time, I got to be my supervisor, so that was really
Awesome.
exciting.
That's so
And
cool.
yeah, it was a fun experience.
So how did you transition just out of curiosity? How was the transition moving from VFX to more of a feature type stuff?
It wasn't too bad because I had done kind of before getting into ILM, I had gotten back into doing test shots
Okay.
because I hadn't really done personal work in a while. At the time, before, like prior to eventually getting into ILM, I was looking for a new job. And uh again, with visual effects, like sometimes the hours can be long. I didn't really have time for a while to be working on my reel. And at that point, the industry was pretty competitive, and some of the reels people were putting out there are just incredible. Just,
Hmm.
so the competition had really stepped up, and I felt like I kind of needed to add some pieces to my reel to be kind of at the level that some other people were at.
Gotcha.
So I had been, I had been doing some work on my own prior to that point, and using some iAnimate rigs, and um, just kind of getting back in the swing of doing reference, making acting choices, all that stuff. So fortunately, it wasn't a huge culture shock because I'd had done some of that beforehand.
Right.
Um, and I think otherwise it was a lot of kind of just, it was more adapting to a show that was very in the middle of production.
Okay.
Um, I jumped in, I think there's 6 episodes, and I started when they towards the end of the 3rd episode. So pretty much like in the middle of the run of the project. So there was kind of established work. So I think making sure that my stuff
Matched
hit
up and
this standard and style and didn't feel out of sync with the rest. But fortunately, I think just I was lucky that I kind of kept my skills up
gotcha.
outside of that. I was
Nice.
fortunate.
Now, was this one of the first ones working kind of more remote?
I've been remote since 2020.
Okay.
So I was used to working remote at that point. If anything, especially being on the East Coast, it was kind of nice because I was actually in my time zone.
Okay.
I was in
Yeah. Being in
Montreal.
Montreal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anything, it was easier.
Okay. Because you went from
But
Luma to back to the East Coast, then working remote.
correct, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mhm.
That makes sense. And now you're working for ILM remote.
Yeah, I'm back with them again because
Yep.
I was ILM, then Cinesite, no, back to ILM.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's
And
hard to keep track of. It's going all over the place.
now you've been working on, I just kind of watched a little bit of this, the Transformers one. Is that correct?
A little bit, a
So you
little
worked
bit.
a little bit on that. Okay.
Yeah, only a couple
Um,
weeks.
okay.
Um,
So prior to that would have been what? Working on what?
I been on a couple things at ILM. Like my first stint at ILM, it was the Hawkeye show, a season of Mandalorian, something else. I can't remember. And then this most recent stint at ILM, I've been on this movie Candy Cane Lane for several months. It's a holiday movie that came
Gotcha.
out last year. I really enjoyed working on that.
Is episodic VFX production drastically different or than film?
At ILM, I'd say no, because the standard was pretty much the same.
Gotcha.
They kind of still expected the same quality of work. It's almost as if you're just working on a longer movie, to be
Okay.
honest. Because most episodics that I worked on, are in the like 6 to 8 episode range. It's not like it's like I didn't work on any kind of, 1 45-minute special kind of thing. So most of them are, it's just like a really long movie,
Gotcha.
to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the only difference is usually the deadline priorities are for earlier episodes, because you can still be working on a show even as it's being released.
Okay.
Like episode 1 could have come out, but you might still be working on like episodes 5 and 6
Right,
kind of
right.
thing.
Gotcha. Want to wrap it up a little bit, but some non-animation questions. What do you enjoy doing in your free time?
So I have a 4-year-old, so just kind of exploring, almost like you're re-exploring the world, but through a kid's lens. So it's a lot of, I would say, a lot of family
Good.
time,
Nice.
which is really great. And so yeah, it's fun. It's funny. I can't think of too many things, but it's like, I mean, I think you're a parent,
Yeah.
correct? So yeah,
Yes.
kids take up a lot of your time, especially when they're young. So it's a lot of parenting, which I enjoy. And I like being outside, like hiking and running, planning to get into kayaking again this summer, like that kind
Gotcha.
of
So a lot more outdoors. I love
thing.
that. That's great. And that's what kind
Yeah.
of why I asked you, even with activities, it could be with, your little one, but hiking and getting outdoors and things of that nature. So yeah, it's always great.
Yeah. I think it's just really, it's refreshing to kind of get outside after being on the computer. I think just in general I usually like doing something very different from being at a computer when I'm not working.
Gotcha.
Whether it's, like even baking or just anything like that. It's nice to do something that's very, very different. I think on the subject of a almost brain reset,
Gotcha.
that kind of same principle applies, at least for me.
Nice. Very cool. Well, Meg, I really appreciate your time on this podcast. It's been a great interview. And like I mentioned, it was basically what I was looking for, just to kind of get a behind the scene of somewhere, one of our past students, I forgot to mention that. That's always wonderful, that we can be instrumental in helping your career. But really appreciate your time on this podcast.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I hope that helped. And it's so nice to chat. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, with that, we are out.